So, hey everyone. Um, I'm back, and yeah, welcome to this week's community hangout. Um, I don't know if you have too much, Justin, that we want to talk about the new steel at all, or okay, well, then I'm just going to quickly share my screen and we'll go through the 2.1.2 issues and see what we have.
I can
Uh,
I can talk about the stuff I made, the improvements I made for Can Stash. If you want to start
Do you
off
want
with
to
that.
start with those? Yeah,
Yeah,
okay, let's start with those, and then we'll go over the 2.1.2 issues and the
let's
new issues that came in
yeah
this week.
let's start with the fun stuff first. Um,
Okay.
so let me share my screen. Where did it go? There we go. And let me open up Steel here, or Can. Um, someone. Can someone pull up the issue real quick? Reported an issue, and share your screen, David, if you've got that handy while I'm pulling up CanJS. Someone reported an issue that CanJS wasn't performing very fast compared to HTML bars and React. And we try to take that stuff very seriously. So I spent some time improving Stash so that it's live binding for the spinning circle example. Would be approximately just as fast. I got it faster than React, but slower a bit than HTML bars. So I want to go through what I did to make that happen, and also through just showing the example. So, is someone able to pull up that issue?
I have it here. It's issue number 1011, if you want to open it up.
Okay, cool. All right, so let's show this fiddle. This is the famous spinning circle. And it's taking forever to load. Can someone show it spinning?
What's the URL?
You can go to that issue. I guess it's capital N. Well, yeah, I would just go to the issue. Well, I'll show it locally running.
Yeah, I can share it. I have it pulled up. Wait a second. Yeah, this is it.
Okay, did you just do it with? Did you just do it with?
I did Backbone there.
Okay, do it with Can plus Stash.
I do. I'll stop it.
Just click Can.
Oh, okay.
So there's Can running about 13. Do it with React. With 12, React's about 6, and then Ember.
HTML bars?
Yeah, that'll be really low.
Yep.
So I don't know what those numbers on mine were, but I got it, yeah, to a little bit, like 4.90 is what I remember in mine. I'm not plugged in right now, and I'm sharing my screen, so it might be a little bit slower, but you can see there, I got ours from about 12, 13 to about 4.9, so about 3 times faster. So most of this had, almost all of it actually had, most of it had little to do with live binding, like actually us updating. It had everything to do with CanJS's event system. So I made 2 changes that really accounted for almost all the performance improvements. The first change I made was CanMap. We removed bubbling from CanMap, but it would still always issue a change event, and then it would also issue then the named event. So there would still be a change event, we just wouldn't bubble that change event. I changed it now so that CanMap doesn't actually dispatch a change event unless someone's actually listening to change, even on the object itself. To do that, I changed, so everything in CanMap calls trigger change when it wants to trigger like something has changed. Now what I do is actually ask if someone's, basically I can listen to if bubbling, if someone, there's this is bubbling, that basically means someone has listened for change on this object. If they're bubbling, we'll actually trigger a change event, but otherwise all we'd ever do is just trigger the named event. The named event is actually what live binding is listening to when it sets up live binding. So I basically cut in half the number of events that are dispatched. So that was a significant performance improvement. The other one I did is our live binding always ran through compute. And it would run through computes, it would always create the kind of, what do I call it, the computed computes, where you pass it a function and that function is called by can read, and then this get value and bind compares it compares the old things you were binding to and the new things you're binding to, and sets up new event handlers and removes old event handlers. One of the actually initial changes that had some impact but not a huge impact was get value and bind was really slow because it was looping through the old sets. It was kind of going through the new set and setting up bindings and the old set and unbinding things. Looping like this in a function is non-optimizable in Chrome. And all of this code inside here was in this get value and bind. So I removed the code that was all in get value and bind to these other functions so that they can do the looping. So get value and bind or prevent unbinding, these things can still be optimized. It's just mostly the looping that is left unoptimized. That was a way of just kind of improving, when you're using those computed computes, improving the performance of them. But what I realized is the reason why HTML bars and the reason why HTML bars was so performant is because it doesn't have this ability, right? It doesn't have the ability to be passed like a function and then read that function and figure out, oh, what is that function actually calling that we need to listen to? With HTML bars, you just basically say, here's, how you, here's when an update happens, and all it has to do is listen to that. So there is a version of computes that you give it a object and you give it the event or the property name you want to listen to. There's another form of that, which all happens in here, where the first argument is an observable, and the second object is the property, and you set up compute that way, and this way it only ever has to listen to that single property. Changing. There's just, you listen for when the name event happens and you update. You never have to do any other computation to see if something has changed. What I then did was made it so Stash can detect that case and optimize for it. So in Mustache Core, there's a special case I put in right here, where it's going to try to read through the scope and figure out what the property is, and you get the compute data for that. We kind of create one compute, and then we're going to create another compute on it. This will delay render time, so I'm going to have to eventually come back and see if there's ways to improve the total render time because we're creating a second compute. Although these computes are super fast to create, so I'm not too worried about their performance, but it will be good to check out. But basically, I have this fast path that takes the original compute that was kind of the compute that Scope gave, which uses that computed computes internally, and I check is if it is only reading a single property and its root is a instance of CanMap, well, then I'm going to use a different form of compute. I'm going to use that other type of compute. And then also, I changed it so instead of previously it was returning a function if a compute was returned from this make evaluator. It would say like basically this function that this is in that reads through the scope with the data, like the mustache data, and returns a function that is converted to a compute. I made it so that if this finds a compute, it just returns that compute, and that is what is bound to. So it's actually just returning the compute directly instead of like a function that was just calling compute anyways. So there's one less compute being created, and there's no use of computed computes anymore. So basically the live binding system, the compute that gets passed to CanView Live now, is a compute that is that more simple compute that's passed directly to CanView Live. I don't know if any of that made sense, but that's why I got triple the performance. Any questions?
Awesome. I have a question. Is there any way to like write a test to like? I'm worried about regressions. Is there any way to handle that?
Yeah. So I have a benchmark. I think Stash benchmark got removed. There is from Mustache. We do have benchmark added. The problem is, so you can run all benchmarks. I made that possible, but the problem is we don't have like a standard computer. What we really need is an EC2 node that's going to run the exact, like a dedicated EC2 node that's going to have the exact same performance no matter what. And we need to run Chrome, Firefox, IE, these benchmarks, and then get that, right? Then we always can use that to compare. Right now, I'm mostly just comparing, like, I have a list of notes on previous performances that I've ran, and I compare it to that. But yeah, we really, a better infrastructure around performance would be very helpful. Something David and I have talked about, but never pulled the trigger on. Any other questions? Hopefully that makes sense. Like, all I was doing was preventing a lot of like those computed computes from running. That was the main thing. Oh, and just so I also did some other minor improvements to CanMap. Get and set and things like that they were previously calling after parts. That was actually kind of one of the more expensive calls. I changed the code in here so it avoids that, and it avoids like some extra reads that were unnecessary in certain cases, and it kind of fast paths when you're just reading a single property. Before it would try to like do, before there was some logic in get that it would try to read the nested property first. Like if you had foo.bar, it would see, hey, is there actually a property called foo.bar? If not, then split it and continue reading foo and then read the bar on the nested object. Now it's much more fast pathed into like, hey, if, basically, if there is no dot, fast path to right here, which is the much more common case. And because getting and setting things are so hyper common in our code base, this also had some more minor improvements, maybe like 5%, 10%. But it's still nice. I'll take it. So I'm hoping we can get this in a 2.1.2. It should be backwards compatible. The only case it won't be potentially is if someone was doing some The only case I can think about, and I don't think this should be supported anyways, is like you had a property that was a string, and then you replace it with a property that is a function or a compute. Or a property that is like a non-observable, and then you replaced it with a property that isn't observable, and you were putting that in live binding. Hopefully no one is doing that. I don't think anybody should. It would be a really weird thing. So I think it's fine for a 2-1-2.
Cool. So I don't know if there are any other questions. Since you're talking already, Leroy had a question of if you could touch on steal versus require AMD. So maybe we can talk about it a little bit. About what's coming up with the new one.
Basically, the new one is the new Steel is going to support AMD ES6, CommonJS, and the old Steel syntax. It's based on System.js and ES6 module loader. Its build is going to support the same things that Steel's build did, but run in Node. Everything's going to run in Node. The goal for it, the real goal for it is that we want to be able to transition to ES6 module loading syntax. I think it's really well done spec on the outside for sure, and I want to start writing code with ES6 or ES5 syntax at least. So we're going to be loading Tracer. So that will be what we use to develop Steel and a lot of our projects. In terms of like a direct comparison to require.js, it should support everything, like everything that directly require.js and R provides, but it should add to it ES6 CommonJS integration. It'll come with good less support, and obviously it'll work really well with CanJS in terms of the templates. We'll have plugins built for them so you can build automatically. If you're using require.js, the only things that you'll have to change is probably your config file, and like obviously your build scripts and things like that. But we're hoping that it really takes off. I think together, all combined, it solves a lot of the. It basically solves a lot of problems that exist. There's no like have your cake and eat it too solution right now. Bower is great until you need to just create like a dummy HTML page and you want it just working on the client without running a server or wanting to build each time for demos or things like that. Then Bower's not good. But require.
You mean Browserify?
Browserify, sorry, Browserify. But require is great, except that I actually like require. It's great, except that it won't be. Everybody kind of hates the syntax of AMD. By moving to ES6, that'll have a lot more power and kind of be a standard. Plus, it doesn't easily work with CommonJS. You have to have a wrapper. Globals are handed kind of weirdly. And then also it will add the multi-build, which is really a unique feature. But anyways, this is CanJS Hangout. We'll be talking about Steel on Monday.
So we're going to have another community hangout on Monday, right?
Yes, definitely.
All right. Cool. I guess we're not going to go for too much longer, but I just quickly wanted to go through some of the issues that came in and our 2.1.2 milestone. I think actually Steven asked about an ES6 module build. So this is going to happen in version 3. I think we want to make CanJS natively ES6. I think with a new steel, we could technically make an ES6 transpiled build for 2.2, right?
I don't think our transpiler currently, it's the only thing it doesn't export to is ES6.
Oh, so we can do CommonJS, AMD.
Yeah, we do AMD already, but I mean that's all. Everything that was supported in the old build still works, so we could add CommonJS possibly.
Okay. Yeah. So this is going to happen. Maybe we can get it to work with ES6, but if not, ES6 is going to be natively supported in CanJS for version 3.0, which we don't really have on the roadmap yet. So we got to figure out when that's going to happen.
I think it'll happen when we just collect enough
new feature,
stuff
breaking.
that we just have to make. You know, we just have enough changes that are we have to make a 3.0. I'm not really. By the way, now with like a 3.0, and you know, I really think we shouldn't be afraid of going 3.0s and 4.0s, and those should kind of come out faster. Now that we have supported documentation for prior versions, I'm okay with releasing a 3.0 that you know, is almost the same, but there's a few minor tweaks, and then a 4.0 a few months later. I really, you know, with good documentation of changes and things like that, releasing different versions, we don't have to have like big, like breaking everything releases. I'd rather have much smaller releases.
Yeah. No, I agree, because then you don't have that many breaking changes either. Because from 1.1 to 2.0, it was not a major ordeal to upgrade because there was only 2 breaking changes. So that will make it easier on the long run. So here is some 2.1.2 issues. There's a couple nice pull requests that I'm going to look through and probably merge in fairly soon. I don't know if there was one specifically we wanted to look at. Mark added the warning for when you extend a model without static properties, because that's usually always wrong, almost always. I think this is a valid bug, and we're just going to merge that in. We just got to quickly review it. As well as 1013. Small documentation fixes are going to be out with the next version.
Can you mute your thing so it doesn't flip over to you?
And then I'm not sure, we have a couple of new issues that came in like yesterday, which I don't know, I don't think we have reviewed yet. Unless does not live bind. Are we gonna? This is gonna get fixed, right, for 2.12.
Yeah, did someone take a look at that already, or was it maybe in Stash they took a look at it? I thought I remember seeing another.
Supposedly in both. So
that was part of the last patch. It was that less would do an else.
Unless didn't work with else.
Right.
Yeah, that was 2.1.1.
Yeah.
But that was in Stash.
We fixed it in both Mustache and Stash.
Oh. Okay.
I'm gonna look at this one. Yeah, it got updated. So it was a pretty big example, but I'm gonna see why the click doesn't work on option elements. I'm gonna see if that's an issue. I think for what we have for 2.12, that's about it. If you can get the performance improvement in, we can probably make a new patch release before next Friday. Anything else anybody wanted to look at or share with
Curtis,
the world?
There was a benchmark for like adding things to lists and removing them. Do you think you could port that? Like make a similar kind of performance. You saw those benchmark pages I was making in Stash. Could you make something similar? at some point?
Yeah, we can. Yeah, they were using JSPerf, which runs it in a loop. But all they're doing was just pushing onto a model list and seeing how fast it rendered. So I can make those style of pages and add it to your benchmarks.
Yeah, that would be helpful, and then I'd like to take a look at that, and maybe if I can find other places, room for improvement before we release this. That'd be nice.
Right, I think that's it for today, this week.
Awesome. Thanks, David.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody.
Does Stephen have another question?
Oh, yeah, he was.
I don't know what he means by.
I think that's what we're talking about. Yeah, I'm not sure. I think that was when we talked about the staff performance. It's faster. That's what we were talking about. So I think that's it. If nobody has anything else, then we'll wrap it up and be back in a week.
Oh, wait, one more thing. Sorry. Now that Brian's here, just because he created an issue about that. So in terms of creating, like, making non-live binding helpers, I'd much rather, it's not a bad idea, but I mean, I'd much rather put our engineering effort into making live binding fast and what it takes to make most use cases of live binding performant.
So your suggestion would be pretty easy to implement. Actually, we could just create a flag that says, can synchronous binding equals true or false, and then basically we can defer to the next thread. Just in this small set timeout, we can defer the live bindings from being formed, which would break all the tests because it wouldn't make it synchronous. But I think most use cases that would be fine. That would cut the render time by a lot, I'm sure.
Yeah. Stephen, I just saw your comment. It would be helpful to be more precise in something like that. That's very vague and impossible to do anything on.
It's probably just being funny.
Yeah. I have no sense of humor. Brian, I think, yeah, I mean, it would break all our tests. I know. That's why I was saying it almost had to be an inversion or a flag, and we would have to. But also, it wouldn't be easy to implement because just the way that our templates work, it's not like a drop-in fix because you really want to avoid the expensive part. Isn't necessarily the live binding, as I've said. It's the creating all these computes and going through all this extra plumbing to like call can reading and things like that to make sure that we can detect it. We would kind of have to do a fast path to get all the data, render the HTML, but then in a second kind of loop then be like, okay, well, these were the elements. Give me these elements. Here's create it. Now we're going to create the compute and then wire it up. It might be possible, actually, that we'd have to do some investigation to see which part of that is takes longer. Is it the creating all these computes and just kind of like reading through the data, or is it the actual setting up of the live binding? But I would. One thing that will solve this will be dirty checking. Because dirty checking, you just read properties. There's less work there to do. It's much easier to delay, to defer the computes being created. I think what we really mostly need is the infrastructure first, just to be able to pass a delayed set up render everything, keep track of the elements, but then later like set up the bindings, set up node lists and things like that.
So is this something that's worth spending time on? What does anyone think? Because something that I've seen come up now, like a bunch. So we'd probably want to do. I mean, I'm not sure. I mean, the helpers that I suggested were, that one helper that would be like a 3-line change. It would be pretty easy to add something, or I can spend more time on trying to get everything deferred.
I mean, from a framework perspective, like, it doesn't make sense if we're promoting live binding to spend time allowing people not to do live binding. Like, there's a million other templating languages people can use if they don't want live binding.
True.
They can use EJS if they don't want live binding.
Well, I mean, I don't know if that's really a valid statement, actually, on second thought, because, I mean, most of the time, people discover render slowness, way into the development cycle. So, like, they'll build the whole app in live binding, and then all of a sudden see that something is being slow, debug it, and find that it's like a critical path, like in a nested loop, which is usually the case.
And?
And then they want to optimize that loop. So, I mean, I guess they
we should be striving. So anybody can optimize the loop. They just use a different templating language, anything, right? Like, I would prefer that at least has anybody spent a lot of time working on performing improvements, each performance? I mean, I've done a little bit, but we could certainly do a lot more. Like, I just spent a day, 24 hours, and I tripled the performance of our, like, the little spinners. If we spent a same amount of time maybe on each or list or things like that, maybe we would also be able to improve the performance.
Well, I think the expensive ones for that example, and I've seen this example now at least 3 times or 4 times, and I've helped people make, like, non-live binding helpers to fix it, because it adds hundreds of milliseconds to, saves hundreds of milliseconds. Usually it's just property access. It's just double bracket name.
Yeah.
So, each is kind of like a secondary concern, I think. I think the main issue is just normal property access.
Yeah, so I made the live binding of that much faster, and then maybe we can make the, have fast paths for the actual initialization of live binding.
Okay.
I mean, what are people doing when they don't have live binding? Are they going to update the DOM themselves, or are they never updating the DOM?
No, it's usually for things that don't need to be updated. There's a lot of cases, like, the example I wrote in that issue is like a name, like a contact name, or in this case, I was helping out a team that was making a channel guide for, like, an online TV program, and so the channel name was never going to change. It's just going to be a static, static properties that don't need to change. And that's, in that case, I mean, that's an argument for why I think the non-live binding helper would be fine, because there's, you're not forcing them to hack things.
I don't want to force them to know about that. Like, I just feel like I just don't. I think I would much rather have us spend 5 days or 2 weeks improving the performance of live binding for 1 day of putting those things in. Like, we should do a lot more work improving performance before we do work trying to work around it.
Okay.
And that's just, I feel like it's like a, I don't know a good analogy, but it's like I don't know, it's like not working out before you take steroids or something like that. It's not a great analogy, but you know what I mean? It's like we should do the right thing first before we do the easy thing.
Okay.
That's how I feel.
Do you have any other concrete areas I could maybe?
Well, the first thing to do is create a benchmark, like a visual benchmark, like I created for the spinner thing, and then
especially for this critical path with the double nested loops and property lookups.
Yeah, sure, and then I mean it'll actually be faster in the version I released because get and set are so much faster, or 10% faster. I mean not so much. And then we can look at it, right? Maybe it's scope that is really slow, how it walks up scope, and maybe we can just fast path, be like, oh, you're a single property. We can do things because it's a single property read, just like I did. You know, maybe there's things we can do there, and maybe because it's like text versus, you know, right now I know that we actually replaced the text node in Stash completely. We should just be updating it because I didn't change CanView Live to recognize, because CanView Live was always taking a span element and replacing it with a text node. Now it's actually taking a text node in Stash and replacing it with a new text node, right? Right there, that doesn't make any sense. And
is that an initial render, or is that just after something changes?
That's an initial render.
Oh, okay. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, there's probably a myriad of ways we can like maybe double performance at least. And if we're doubling performance, at some point, then yes, people are going to run into the limitations of pure JavaScript, right? But if we're not like at least parallel with all the other frameworks' performance in the same thing, then we should certainly be working on that instead of like finding ways, giving people ways around it. It's more documentation, more API people need to understand. I want to avoid that as long as we can.
Sure. Okay.
Cool. All right. Cool.
Let's wrap it up for this week. See you again next week.
Thanks, guys.